HiSec Buyback offers a 90% GDA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
Hello and welcome to Talking in Stations. My name is Artemis, and we aren't quite into the episode just yet. I just wanted to give you a quick warning that we had a little bit of technical difficulties while we were streaming the episode live, and it did impact the audio. So the first 4 minutes and 45 seconds after this message ends will be a little bit rough on the audio side. You can feel free to skip forward. You'll only miss a few of the introductions for the candidates, and then you'll jump straight into the discussion with Stitch Kaneland. I hope you enjoy the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Talking in Stations. I'm your host, Rahne, and I'm joined by Nick, our engineer. Today is a CSM-focused discussion. So normally our format is, you have me, and we talk about the news, we kind of bring on some guests to talk about why the news is important or give us some insight. This one will be a bit different. We're going to have these guests, you can see them on camera, hopefully. Yep, they're all on camera. And then I'm just going to maybe pitch them some questions about CSM or CCP or their approach and their platforms, and let them talk away. So this one's really focused on, if you notice the candidates, we got Mark Resurrectus, Phantomite, and Stitch Kaneland. So obviously like I would say small gang, less popular regions of space, playstyles, wormholes, low sec, etc. And so I will kick it off with Mark introducing himself. Mark, if you want to give a quick blurb about who you are and what you stand for.
Sure. My name is Mark Resurrectus. I am the CEO of the Holy Roman Empire and the executor of the Turbo Feeder Glory Alliance. We're a mid-sized wormhole alliance who live in C5 space. We live in the C5 Red Giant. We've been out here since 2019 in some way, shape, or form. You know, I'm a wormhole-centric candidate. Most of my platform issues are specific to wormholes, but I have a broader appreciation for the more general issues affecting the game. You know, specific concerns I feel like are often best left to specific candidates, but I think there are much bigger issues that we can all kind of address, you know, simultaneously, specifically about player retention and the way CCP is marketing their game. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, no problem. And then Phantomite, you want to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Hey there, I'm Phantomite. I've been on the CSM once before. I intend to completely unfreeze PvP in all areas of the game, and the key to that is by providing people with opportunities to progress, to earn money, and get content outside of being in a large group. And that is the most important thing that needs to happen to this game.
All right, thank you. And then Stitch Kaneland, introduction.
Hi, I'm Stitch Kaneland. So I fly with Tuskers right now, but I've predominantly been a solo PvPer, small gang, but I've been kind of everywhere in space. So I used to live in low sec, then I lived in faction warfare low sec, then non-faction warfare low sec, and now I live in wormholes. So I've kind of been all over the place. A lot of people know me from, you know, my quote-unquote good Reddit posts. I've had several things implemented into the game just through my posting, and then also a lot of people familiar with me with like my solo PvP videos, Battleship PvP, stuff like that. So right now I'm mainly focusing on this ecosystem balance, faction warfare, and then like more of like a casual playstyle, because I only play with one account, so I don't have any alts or anything like that. So I'm more focusing on the, you know, more of the casual player or solo player and things that they can actually do.
Alrighty, thank you everyone. And then we all know our glorious Nick, who you guys can see, but I doubt he'll be talking too much, so you can wave to us, Nick. So with that, we'll kick it off. I know I asked this at my CSM debates yesterday, but I really like this question. So CCP has been glorious enough to grant us what would be, I would say, the closest to a roadmap we've seen in a few years, and that's their discussion of saying, hey, we're revamping faction warfare for the next year. And I know this one maybe apply a little less to Mark, but I still want you to answer. But with knowing CCP has a faction warfare update like being designed and planned, what's your approach to giving them feedback, and how can you provide the best feedback to them out of all the other candidates? And we'll start at the bottom with Stitch.
So, having come from faction warfare, I lived there for a few years before Citadels came out, and kind of it just went downhill from there. There's a lot of things in the presentation they gave that are things that we've mentioned before, I've mentioned before, like the front lines. That's something that could be incorporated really well because it'll help prevent. I think it'll help to some degree address the bots that are in faction warfare, because they'll be able to, assuming it's going to be kind of set up in this way, LP, I'm assuming, would be gained a lot higher in the front lines compared to like just, botting AFK somewhere in some dead region where no one's actually passing through. So I think that'll be good for faction warfare. As far as, how I'm going to be able to, help CCP again, I've lived in faction warfare for many years. Then I lived in low sec for many years, just non-faction warfare. Excuse me. And so I was, kind of in there during its golden years, so I know what worked, what doesn't work. And there's been a lot of ideas thrown around over the years that I've had for low sec and faction warfare low sec. And there's a lot of things I'd like to see reworked that are just easily abused or just aren't working in the current iteration, like LP gains, tags, the missions, and then I'd like to see like a rookie complex, something where you can't bring Navy or pirate frigates into it, somewhere where, newer players can actually learn to PvP and not get dunked on by people in like high grades in their, Dramiel or whatever the case may be.
Alrighty, thank you. And Phantomite?
Faction War has the opportunity to be exactly what this game needs in terms of being something that is accessible, given that it is in low sec in areas that are interwoven with high sec. It is somewhere that people can form small groups and have content and money making together, which is exactly what the game needs in terms of opportunities. And with the gate system, perhaps the most important part of what makes faction warfare unique, the gates limiting ship types, then it really starts to create a closer to level playing field for people who want to fight and they don't want to spend 2 billion ISK per ship to be competitive. I think that I have an incredibly useful dual set of experience with this, having been in faction warfare, having been a pirate fighting against faction warfare groups, and then as the years went on, being part of one of the groups that has hugely oppressed faction warfare. So being able to see exactly what it is that we're doing that freezes so much of the activity in faction warfare. And so those are the experiences that I'm going to be leaning on, that I want to help CCP design this with.
Alrighty. And then, Mark, do you want me to retailor the question for you, since I know you're wormhole, not faction warfare?
No, I mean, I think
Okay.
I think the concerns are pretty similar. We connect to LoSec, pretty frequently through our various chains, and it is, in a lot of cases either just straight up a wasteland, or you get lucky and you find one or two systems that are pretty heavily, that have more activity. The idea that faction warfare, or a revamped faction warfare, could introduce more players, especially players in smaller gangs, to that region of space would be a boon, a huge boon for anybody in J space, and really anybody, period, who's looking for content on a more like plate-sized scale. I mean, you're talking about being able to engage with groups of players no bigger maybe than 15, 20 at a time, as opposed to running into any kind of block staging and getting 50, 60 at a time, if you're lucky. So being able to have more connections to more places that are more active is a net win. And while I can't pretend to be the an expert on how that exactly needs to play out, the idea that it would that would be a focus at least tells me that CCP is even tangentially taking a vested interest in something that is, I think, centric to the health of the game, which is finding ways to get more people out into more regions of space and making those playstyles more fun, as opposed to just nerfing other playstyles to try and drive people away from them. I've said at length on other shows that, I'm not particularly keen on some of their game design decisions in the past with regards to how they move people from one thing to another. If they want to, if they're trying to create content drivers or get other people into other regions, traditionally they've done that by making one area of space or one playstyle so intolerable that nobody wants to engage with it anymore. The idea that they would be spending the time and the effort to try and create something that will compel people to move there as opposed to something that will drive them away from something else is promising as far as I'm concerned.
Alrighty, thank you. I do have some questions in the chat, but a lot of them are super memey, so I'm going to ignore them. One of them accuses Stitch of flying a Falcon Hall, which I think is a big meme. I don't know if those are your friends out there.
Stitch.
Probably. I don't have an alt, so the only E warships I ever fly are like Solo Rapier and Hugin.
Nice, okay. But yeah, so I guess overall I'm just curious. So we talk about faction warfare. I feel like all of you have probably been impacted by CCP's changes. Like they have this grand sweeping change. It gets introduced to the game, and in some way, shape, or form, it hurts your own personal playstyles, even though those playstyles have all been slightly different. And I know Phantomite can probably speak to this a bit better, having been on CSM, but knowing the thoughts from some CSMs where they say, well, we told CCP our feedback and they went forward anyway, they just ignored it. How do you plan to approach CCP in a way that will share your concerns and have them listen without, damaging relationships or anything along those lines?
My experience as the year on the CSM is that during the first year, I was able to have very, unsatisfyingly limited impact on the game, which is what I think probably these people are describing. However, over time since then, with ongoing conversations and things that were talked about beforehand, a number of things that I had spearheaded have started to come to be or have already arrived in the game. Quite frankly, I think that a year just isn't long enough. And that could be a fault with CCP, or that might just be the truth about it. But I did find the right ways to engage with CCP. It just takes time, and if I do say so myself, an accurate and reasonable and, as far as is possible, unbiased presentation of the facts and then potential solutions. I feel I've had success.
Alrighty. And then Stitch, I don't know if you had any thoughts. I know your perspective is different because you haven't been on CSM, but any thoughts of how you would approach CCP?
Well, I mean, kind of what Phantomite's saying is the same thing that I've experienced on my end. Like, I've had discussions with devs before, because again, I've had 5 to 7 things implemented into the game just from my posting, and the most recent ones being the Blops changes, or the Black Ops changes for the battleships, and then the shield extender and plate extender bonuses, the roll bonuses. And I mean, CCP's called out to me before when they've done, their own podcasts and things like that. And I think kind of like what Phantomite's saying is that as long as you're providing non-biased feedback, typically they'll listen. And even on my side, my perspective, some of these changes I've recommended, I recommended, a year or two before they were implemented. So it doesn't, I think a lot of people have the perspective or the assumption that CCP should react immediately because you make one good post, and that's just not how it works. I think they put it kind of in their backlog and say, hey, this is a good idea, but it doesn't really line up with our theme right now. We'll get to it, when that theme comes up. So I'm kind of already familiar with how they interpret things just from my previous experience with them, either talking directly to devs or just seeing how it plays out when I make a post and I see that same changes show up a year later or 2 years later.
Alrighty, thank you. And then now for you, Mark, if you want to answer.
Oh, I do. Here's the thing. CCP is more and more kind of, saying the quiet part out loud. And being very clear that they are money motivated. They got to have that good Iceland bucks. Okay. Those good Iceland dollars. And that's great. Everybody's on board. Okay. You got to make money. This is a business. Pearl Abyss is sitting back there, counting them fat stacks from Black Desert and wondering why Eve isn't generating more cash. I get it. Okay. I think you have to be realistic with the devs when it comes to what their core issues are, because it does feel, especially more recently, that a lot of the changes that they've been trying to make have been throwing things at the wall and hoping they'll stick, out of not just a lack of understanding about how the game works necessarily, though I think that does play into it, but also just because they're trying to get something that's going to bring in more revenue. I mean, you are, the change to the subscription rates is part of that. It really does feel like they were like, oh, we need to make more money quickly. What is the way that we can do this? What they don't seem to realize, and what I cannot for the life of me fathom, is that if they make the game more compelling, there are many people who still like this game and still would like to like this game, and still want to play this game, but have been driven out because either their play style has been eroded to a husk of what it used to be, or they have just found the game not fun or challenging in some other kind of existential way that they can't quite come to grips with anymore, and it's just not worth the subscription fee anymore. And you make that worse by making the subscription fee more expensive. So being able to look at them and say, listen, we know you got to make that good dollar. We all get it. You're all about that green. That's fine. If you make these changes, this will make the game more compelling to more people, and more people coming to play your game and paying those subscription fees will mean that you make more money. If you want to make the game better for more people, those more people all have to pay their subs. Either they're buying Plex in game to pay for it, which is then being sold off by other people who are or who are buying Plex. Like this is a process. Like that. This is all part of it. I mean, they want to make money. Clearly, they want to make money. They've gone from saying that they would never sell skill points years ago to now having them in bundles that you can purchase right now for $40 on the store currently. If you want to find a way to make more money, there are other ways to do it, and some of them involve making common sense suggestions from people, or taking common sense suggestions from intelligent people who know what the game is all about, and turning those into actionable changes in the game that will drive more people into your game. I understand the new player experience is important, and it's important for CCP to bring more people in, right? That's great. New players are great, but you've got to be able to retain those players, and you got to bring people back. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. I mean, both of these guys can attest to the fact that there are whole regions of space now where there used to be tons and tons of people out there. My region is as affected as any other, and I would argue probably more so in some cases. There are entire groups of people who have either folded, collapsed in on themselves, or just stopped playing because the game is just not fun right now. And the fact that that is the state of things is kind of sorry. So I would for my money, I would go into those conversations with that same approach, saying, listen, I'm on your side here. Like, I want to get more people I want to make you more money. The way you make more money is by making the game better for more people. That's it. Bottom line.
So we talked where you meant. Oh, go on, Phantomite.
That's very much literally a build it and they will come type.
Unironically, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's along the lines of CCP asking for. It's almost as raising the prices without, or indeed just charging for the game at all, without making sure that the game is engaging for the people who they're asking to pay, isn't too dissimilar from a non-guaranteed Kickstarter project.
I mean, it really is. It's the equivalent of saying that I need you to be paying. It's like rent increases, right? Nobody likes to have their rent increased unless they feel like they're getting more out of it, right? Like, okay, you're going to update the carpets in my house. Okay, well, we'll pay you a little bit more in rent to do that. But at the same time, players need to feel like they're not getting shanked in the back by the developers saying, well, we're not going to make the game any more compelling. We're not going to give you anything else, but we do need you to pay us more money for it. Especially now, more than any other time, where people are feeling, the squeeze in other areas of their life. You know, if you want to make more money, have more people play the game. I mean, I mentioned this on a show last week. My very good friend Ashy at Foxholers had a tweet last month where she talked about how in their corp alone, Outfox, which itself is a medium-sized wormhole alliance, they've lost 89 accounts from their players over the last month. And I know the number's higher now. Teddy told me 2 weeks ago that was already over 100 accounts. Those are 100 accounts that are no longer being paid for. CCP is generating no money from them. You're telling me that the answer is to make those accounts more expensive and then lose value in them, as opposed to dropping the rate to, 100, let's say dropping it from $15 US to $10 US or $8 US. And suddenly now getting all of those accounts back, plus others who still want to play the game and find. I mean, people will play something that they think is less than great because it's cheaper, it's just something to do, right? They'll find some value in that, and maybe Eve will be, people will be able to find value in Eve if it's not as expensive, right? At the same time, I think the better option would be to, if you want to increase the cost of the sub, that's fine. You need to find a way to make it worthwhile to the players. You need to make the game more compelling, and also probably don't increase the cost of the sub.
So kind of along those lines, so you guys mentioned monetization. So Stitch, I want to hear your thoughts. Obviously, nobody likes a sub price increase. I don't think, no matter how you paint it, nobody enjoys it. But what are your thoughts of CCP monetization overall? I know they already monetize skins. They monetize like booster packs and stuff like that. Like, what are your thoughts on CCP monetization? How comfortable are you with the variety of options that they have currently, let alone ones that they could potentially have?
So I'm pretty comfortable with most of the monetization options, except for obviously the, poofing ships into existence. I'm, maybe this is a controversial opinion, but I really don't care about skill points. If a new player wants to buy skill points to try and get into the game faster, after that initial hump where they kind of understand what's happening, that's fine. Like, I don't know why people have this opinion that skill points, shouldn't be, a way to help people get into the game faster. I think it's a good mechanic that CCP can utilize in some degree, like with daily logins and things like that, to help kind of speed up that process. Because there's a point when you're a new player where you just run into a wall of like week-long skills or month-long skills, and there's really nothing else that they can really do, at least if they're trying to get into a specific fit. They're stuck. And, it's just not really that fun. And sometimes people will say, well, just go play another game while you're waiting for this to train. And it's just like, that's not really respecting their time. So having some way to jump ahead if they want to, in my opinion, is fine in regards to skill points. Ship skins I'm perfectly fine with. I'd like to see more of them that, are actually interesting instead of just like a recolor. The things they mentioned in FanFest of like the actual modifications on ships looks pretty, just to see how that plays out. Hopefully it's not just like they do it for one ship and then they forget about it. And then there's tons of other things, the Alliance skins and Citadel skins, like Citadel interior skins, engine trails. There's like a ton of things that they could do here that I have a good feeling people would buy. They're just really dragging their feet on it. So again, as far as monetization goes, really the only thing I don't like is just poofing ships into existence, but otherwise everything else I'm fine with.
And then I know somebody's gonna rail on me if I don't ask this question. Cat ears? Would you be okay with cat ears on ships or on player characters?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, definitely player characters. Maybe we'll see a meme attachment for ships at some point. Which, again, I don't really care. The game still plays the same, and I'm not going to be staring at your ship with cat ears on it. So,
well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, it is a silly thing, right? And it's a silly meme thing that everybody kind of has turned into a real thing at some point. But Eve markets itself as this gritty, dark space drama in space with spaceships, and it's very dark and oppressive, and that's great. And in general, it is like that for a lot of people. But at the same time, like, I mentioned this, not that long ago. The biggest, most influential alliance in the game is called Goon Swarm, and their nemesis is the fucking try hardest, edgy pandemic horde. Like, you can't take yourself too seriously. At a certain point, you have to be like, okay, well, this is what this is, which is fine, and I'm in favor of that. Like, a little bit of campiness makes the game go a long way, and if you need to stick fucking cat ears on an avatar to make that happen for you, then Godspeed.
I think it's kind of funny you mentioned that because Goon Swarm has like this cartoony bee, and Horde has like
I know.
this little happy bean riding like a scooter thingy.
Like, you can't pretend that those things both exist in a hardcore dark universe. Like, it is kind of, but also no.
All right. So, and then I know, so I'm asking Stitch a lot of questions because I know he's got a dip soon. So I want to make sure I can get all his thoughts before he leaves. And so, Stitch, you're a balanced kind of focus guy. You mentioned before you've suggested things to CCP via Reddit posts and other things, and you've actually seen them implemented in the game. So I'm kind of curious as your thoughts. If you could have the power to change one thing in Eve, whether large or small, what would you implement that you could think would fix Eve? And I put fix Eve in quotes because I feel like that's very subjective. But what would be like your Jesus feature to save Eve?
Unfortunately, there's not a single fix for Eve. There's tons of interconnected things, but I would see it's I'm trying to think, should I just like generalize it and be like, oh, does just fix this whole region, or should I fix one specific thing in that region? I think, and this is something I've gone back to time and time again, but I think the major issue right now with Eve is citadels and just their implementation and their supporting structures. There's almost every problem that is in Eve ties back to citadels in some degree. Like a few years ago, when people were complaining about nullsec income and stuff like that incorrectly, which, I even had this opinion, so I've changed my tune. A lot of people focus on nullsec income as a problem. I don't think income is an issue. It's the way citadels were implemented to allow unrestricted proliferation of assets, industry, everything like that. And then you have like the supporting structures like Ansiblex, which, in previous times we had jump bridges that had jump fatigue. They could, if you tackled someone on a jump bridge, they couldn't jump right back out of it. So there's a lot of issues happening that are affecting multiple areas of that space. And then, then we implement like the DBS to counteract the issues that were implemented through citadels. Like, I don't think the DBS is doing anyone any favors. Most likely CCP is not going to get rid of it. But if I had that option, I just want to scrap it completely. Because, again, I don't think this is an income issue. We shouldn't be punishing people to make money. We should be punishing the way that they can proliferate without any kind of restriction. There need to be restrictions on that to help kind of bring everything back in line. But I don't care if, some person's nullsec is making 250, 300 mil an hour. Obviously, if we go too high, it'll kind of skew things. But, again, I don't think this is an income issue. We need people out in space doing things, wanting to be out in that space because they're actually getting a reward out of it. And then that'll kind of fix the whole issue of, finding engagements, finding interactions, people wanting to defend their space. And again, that comes back to citadels, their supporting structures. And so, yeah, if I was going to pick one thing, I'd say, let's focus on fixing citadels and their supporting structures.
Alrighty. And then I'll pass the question around too, because I'm actually curious for everyone else's thoughts. I'll probably start with Phantomite, because I know you love talking structures as well. So I don't know if you agree or if you have a different thought.
I've been preaching about citadels being a giant issue for the last 2 years as a CSM and as a not CSM, and before that as well. The key thing about all Upwell structures and their abilities in particularly nullsec, but it negatively affects every area of space, including wormholes as well, is that they provide gigantic levels of stability, and stability is absolutely antithetical to the purpose and where the fun comes from in EVE Online. People need to be unseatable from their space. But the issue is when you have massive stability, people accumulate things to the extent that the stakes are now too high to lose. You now can't lose because you'll lose 4 years of work in one go. The game shouldn't be encouraging people to create massive, sprawling, permanent empires in the game. It's disgusting that anybody in this game is permanent at any level in their endeavors. I want people to build titans. I want people to go and fight with them, but we can't live in a game where it's a cold war where the superpowers are incredibly far apart from each other, and the war is essentially make sure you've got enough titans to deter invasion. That's not EVE Online. That is a war taking place on Reddit rather than in the game with guns.
Alrighty. Well, Mark, I want to hear your thoughts. I'm assuming they're different than what Phantomite and Stitch touched on.
I mean, yeah, to a certain extent. I think the general consensus or the general appeal is the same. If I was going to make a single change, it wouldn't actually really be to the game. It would be to the way the game is patched. I've said this a lot recently, but I really don't like the way CCP has approached making modifications to the game over the last couple patch cycles, going back the last, honestly, 2 or 3 years. So in general, when CCP wants to make a change to the game, what they'll do is they'll make a change to the game without recognizing that trying to change one aspect of one region of space could potentially negatively impact multiple other play styles or other regions of space. I have sit here and complained for like the last 2 years now about the consequences of surgical strike and it being a disaster to my region of space. Surgical strike was not intended to necessarily affect the things. It was, at least as to my understanding, not intended to affect the things that it affected in J space, but it did. And if somebody had been around to, have that conversation with CCP, or honestly, anybody on the CSM probably could have said that. Like, hey, you recognize that by doing this, you're going to be changing things that are not just the way, large fights break out in nullsec, and the way that faxes move in and out of fights, and the way, faxes tank when they're in blobs of 50 or 60 other faxes, right? Like, we all recognize that making this one change won't just do that. And it's easy to make a change like that because the largest number of people, or the largest number of people in a single engagement, will feel that change. And so that's where you're going to get a lot of the publicity about whether or not it was effective or not. But in plenty of other places, changes like that are disastrous. In fact, it is probably one of the contributing factors to why wormhole space has turned into just fields of crabs as far as you can see. Is because a lot of the PvP content that used to be out in J space dried up as a result of changes like that. And it has not gotten too much better. The most recent battleship updates did some to benefit that, although arguably Marauders are a little bit overtuned now in general. But if I was going to make a single change, it would be to address 2 things. One, both how CCP implements changes on a fundamental level, and recognize that you can make patch changes more nuanced, and you don't have to just put a flat number out for the entire game and say, this is what it's going to be. That's it. And at the same time, have better quality control. I mean, I've not ever worked in for a game studio. I've not worked in game design. I know people who work in quality control for game studios. And in general, what I've heard time and time again is that the amount of time that they spend between when they announce a change or when a change starts going into production and when the change goes live is very short compared to how it usually is rolled out with other groups. I can tell you right now that, in other industries, that kind of quality control just would not be acceptable, because the customers would be, would hell, even in the business I'm in now, if we had that level of quality control and we were making these kind of changes that
Oh no, did he close his Discord?
He kicked himself.
I just saw his camera vanish. He stopped talking. Okay. So I think Mark may be having technical difficulties mid-sentence. Okay, he just says I just dropped. All right. I think he's coming back. Okay, there he is. Sorry about that, team. All right, do you remember where you dropped out, Mark?
Yeah, Discord's a really bad platform.
I agree.
I don't know what that was all about. Yeah, just quality control. I mean, apparently Discord needs it too. But anyway, I guess the point I'm getting at is CCP can stand to be more nuanced in the way that they approach the way they approach changing the game. It would be beneficial if they were going to do changes like that, to say, okay, we're going to identify this, this here, this here, this here. These are all different things, and we're going to be making incremental changes to all of them, as opposed to just one big sweeping change for everything. I think that is a better platform, or a better idea, and that would fix other things. It would have fixed the Citadel issue earlier. They could have said, okay, well, we're trying to get away from POSes. What do we like about POSes? What do we not like about POSes? We want to do this certain thing. We want to have it available for this, this certain region and this certain region. How are we going to implement it in these areas? Instead of just saying, here's one thing, you all get it, and you're all going to like it. And that's what it's going to be for the next 5 years.
And then they combine the best of everything from both outposts and POSes and none of the negatives. So then we're left with just no penalties for anything, which is, again, why I think everything comes back to Citadels being a major issue in the game.
I agree.
Yeah, so kind of with that, because you kind of mentioned on this, Mark. All right, you got your camera back. So kind of like that iteration, or like more time between, hey, here's the idea, or here's the change and implementation.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people, I always just think of like CCP and iteration on things, where it feels like they push a change in and they're like, we know it's kind of broken, but we'll fix it later, don't worry. And then many times,
enough.
many
Not
times
good enough,
that does
because
not
it doesn't
happen.
work. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. There's no nuance to it. It just repeatedly doesn't happen.
Yes, and so I know that's, especially as older players, they definitely know the feeling of, okay, we want to scream as loud as we can, because we know once it's implemented, it won't be touched. And I feel I want to focus on one thing in particular, like meta changes and ship meta, because all I can think of is, like, for the past 4 years, Munins Online, and like I just think of like Munins Online, and everyone's like, oh, we're tired of Munins, but it feels like we've had iterations on ships over and over and over again. Like, we talk about the battleships. I think bombers got like updated and changed. We've had, I don't know, the resist changes been like, I feel like people are flying more battle cruisers and battleships, but everyone still has the Munin doctrine. So I kind of want to focus this one towards Stitch of, how do you think CCP can balance the ship meta, and what are your thoughts around like best practices that they could do to, so we don't see this stale meta for 4+ years?
So the hack meta specifically is not a new thing. Like, the Munin has been around for, well, the rebalanced Munin has been around for, 4 years, like you said. But we've had, previous hack metas like Ishtars and, to a lesser degree, Zealots, back when Drakes were a thing. There's always been problem ships that kind of stick out in the hack meta. And I think that's because CCP is trying to do too many things with one ship class. And T2 ships are supposed to be specialized, in theory. I know there's obviously exceptions to that. Just because, again, they haven't been iterated on. So they just kind of keep putting things into them without taking anything out. So now they're just this mass of, I'm just better than everything, typically, which is kind of the problem with hacks. And, hacks should not, in the past, when you had like a sniper ship, like let's say in the past it was like a Rogue or, an Abaddon or something like that, or even like the sniper Petes, or the sneaky Petes, I mean, the rail Tengus, like they had no tank on them. They were fit primarily as like sniper ships and hard to scan down, and that was kind of their meme. But again, they were primarily built around not having a lot of tank. And what we're left with now with hacks is that they have good speed, they have good cap regen, they're cheap, all of them have weapon range bonuses, some of them have tracking or application bonuses. And inherently, because they're a medium weapon ship class, they have good tracking or better tracking than large options. And then on top of all that, on top of everything else they got going for them, then CCP is like, we're going to give you like an invuln button for 10 seconds too. So this all goes against what a sniping platform is supposed to be. Typically, snipers are slower. They're either, less tanky, at least in the case of like cruisers or battle cruisers, and they have clear, I don't want to say penalties, but they have clear weaknesses, things that you can exploit to get on top of them. Like if you get on top of a sniping platform, typically they can't hit you, but like even a Munin can still potentially hit you depending on what you're in if you're on top of it. So for hacks specifically, they need to be refocused into more of a mid-range class. No more of this sniping at like 120 kilometers in your Eagle or Munin or Cerberus or whatever the case may be. There needs to be, for them to synergize properly with the ADCU, they should be more of like a skirmish platform or mid-range platform where they're not, and the easiest way to fix that is just to reduce their targeting range. For example, the Munin is at 100 kilometers for its base targeting range once you have level 5 skills. So we can just take it down to 55 kilometers, and that takes care of a lot of issues because it puts them in close range to other counters. But again, that's kind of one aspect of it. The majority of it is that it needs to actually refocus completely into more of like, I would almost say maybe like an afterburner bonus role, maybe not as strong as like Sancha, but something to where they can get into the thick of things, synergize with the ADCU, project decently to like that 50, 60 kilometer range, so they're not completely helpless, but not where they're like sniping across, the grid. And also they can still snipe because they'll still have those range bonuses, but they need to make sacrifices for it. So SIBOs, SIGAMPs, rigs, they're not going to be this tanky platform if they're a sniper fit. They actually need to make real, sacrifices for the fit. And another thing too is, at least going back to iteration with how CCP does things, is when they do a rebalance, there's a common thing that happens where people are like, well, I just, especially for newer players now, maybe less so with veterans, but they'll say, I just got done training this like a week ago and now CCP is nerfing it. And that applies to anything, not necessarily hacks. It could be old work rules or, potentially future Marauder changes. But, there's an easy way CCP can work around that to make iteration less painful for people, and they already have a method to do it, which is a daily login. So anytime there's a major rebalance change, hand out SP for a week, so it doesn't have to be a lot, but it could be something to help soften that blow, so that way a new player doesn't feel like they just wasted a bunch of time on a doctrine that is no longer viable because of balance changes. And again, this goes back to SP, and like, people really should not be caring so much about SP anymore. We don't want to penalize people for meta changes that need to happen, and we don't want players to feel like they're just kind of like constantly playing catch up. Give them a catch up mechanic, implement it as a theme through a balance change, so we can actually get some of this iteration in with just fewer restrictions, or at least maybe what CCP might feel as restrictions of doing meta changes.
Alrighty, thank you for your thoughts. And I know, Phantomite, you were kind of jumping in earlier. Do you want to wrap up your thoughts, or did you have anything in agreement or disagreement with Stitch?
A little bit of an extension of that, really. Something that I'm very passionate about, that I have been pushing for a long time and intend to keep pushing, is that close range weapons, especially at the cruiser size, have a number of issues that are caused by cruiser-sized long-range weapons. For instance, using close-range ammo, the cruiser-sized long-range weapons don't do they're not too crazily different in their straight DPS. It's the situation where even if you're going to be fighting at a closer than a sniping range, it's still often a pretty good idea to fit long-range weapons just for the flexibility, because even at close range with long-range cruiser-sized weapons, you're still doing a respectably large amount of DPS compared to the actual close-range weapons that exist in this game. And so something that I want to do is I want a sweeping reduction a little bit in the effective ranges of all long-range weapons platforms in this game, notably medium and large weapons. I want people who are deciding that they're going to be fighting with long-range fits to have to be a little bit closer, and I think that that's going to help people make some meaningful choices between close range and long range weapons a lot more. This goes hand in hand with work I've been doing to try and create more situations for close range combat. Right now, for instance, as one example off the top of my head, the sheer size of the model of citadels, aside from the other problems with citadels, means that you can be shooting a citadel effectively 500 kilometers from the people on the other side of it. And, things like this are not okay. They need to change. I have some ideas for that. I've been talking about some ideas for that with CCP to reduce the effective range on battlefields so that people can make some more choices. And I feel that this by itself, this kind of concept by itself, it's not going to fix every single problem in combat in the game, but I think that this by itself can go a long way towards rebalancing things like the Munin and the Cerberus.
And then your thoughts, Mark? I know it's probably a bit different being in wormholes with CCP changing something and you guys have to adjust, but
Yeah, I mean, the biggest example of that was when Surgical Strike popped out and suddenly we wormhole space turned into hams online for a while. And we're only just trying to break out of that. Over the last couple of months, we've seen, well, because of the battleship changes, people are moving into basically just Lashaks online, which is different and not necessarily better, but it is different. But yeah, I mean, it's the same, it's the same thing. Whenever you make a balance change like that, I don't agree that you necessarily need to, like, every change doesn't need to be focused on every single facet of the game, because it's unreasonable to expect to say, like, okay, well, what are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to make short range ammo do more damage than it did before. Okay, well, how is that going to affect every potential play style? Well, we have some, oh, well, don't worry about that right now. Let's just put it in there and see what happens. And so while it's not unreasonable while it is unreasonable to understand everything or every potential change ahead of time, what is kind of frustrating is when there's just no foresight ahead of it, period. So that's where you end up because in wormholes, brawling is kind of a big, is a bigger deal than it is in a lot of other places, because most of your engagements with other people are on wormholes. And there's a lot of play back and forth between wormholes, because you don't have to worry about gun timers. The wormhole doesn't care as long as you're only jumping one way every so often. So a lot of those fights happen on wormholes, and kite doctrines are much less rare, or much more rare, much less common. And so you end up where they say, okay, well, we want to increase we want to rebalance short range ammo, which they did, but that inevitably led to just a single doctrine being, common for basically everybody, which was, hams. It was just hams. It was heavy assault missiles everywhere. Nighthawks get, 1,000 DPS cold with hams, and you can push it a little bit more. You can push it up to 1,100 and almost 1,200 DPS with drones, in that, out of a battle cruiser platform. You can get a lot of those through a wormhole. Legions, same way. People flew a lot of legions. People were flying a lot of. We saw people in sacrileges for a long time. People were flying sacks because those are just the best weapon platforms. Because hams, one, the balance fight, I guess, in that exchange. So in my mind, this sounds like a stupid thing to say, and I feel kind of stupid saying it, but whenever you're balancing something, I feel like you should be trying to bring things more in balance. You should be trying to create an atmosphere where the most possible play styles are valid at the same time without making any one thing just straight up broken. And the way you do that is, I think Stitch maybe mentioned it, and I know Phantomite has mentioned this before in the past too, making smaller incremental changes to, iterative changes to different aspects of the game, whether they be ship bonuses or, the stats on certain weapon types. If you making smaller changes like that to bring things closer into balance, as opposed to making a big change and hoping it all swings back into balance, is better, because hoping everything's just going to settle after you knock the whole thing down is unrealistic, I think.
And to jump in real quick before I potentially have to go here, I wanted to mention that, or kind of touch on what you mentioned there of bringing things imbalanced,
mm-hmm.
which when I talk about balance, and personally, Eve should never be a balanced game. A perfectly balanced Eve ends up being a boring game and can potentially just end up turning into pure rock, paper, scissors, which, to some degree is, I guess easy to digest for people, but it ends up being a solved problem like 99% of the time. So when I talk about balance, it's not that I want the game to be perfectly balanced. It's just that I want a rotating or changing, so that way there's always some kind of change happening. Things are feeling fresh. You're not feeling stuck in like a stale meta. And, in my opinion, OP ships are good for the game for a limited period of time. So like Marauders are a good example. I think a year of Marauders is probably enough. But, for that first 6 months or so when they were changed, there's kind of a gold rush mentality to theory crafters of, how can we counter these properly? Is there another ship maybe that'll work out here? Is there a new fleet composition or doctrine or something like that we can make out of it or counter them? So we started to see a lot of ways to deal with them until it kind of found the solution of, okay, these things are just kind of OP. We just need to throw a bunch of bombers at them or a bunch of nightmares or whatever to deal with them, at least on like a small gang setting. But, and the same thing applies to, like, in the past, we had like the Orthrus and, things like that, where they were just really strong ships and people like to complain about them. But eventually people found counters to them, especially in the case of like Orthrus and Garmer. At least and those were like super common in factional warfare back in the day, where people were just like, these are so OP, we can't deal with them. I wish CCP would nerf them, but there were counters to them. It's just, people didn't want to fly the counters typically. So OP ships are good for the game. It's just, we don't want to have an OP ship in the meta for years at a time, because people get tired of it. It skews everything. And, again, the meta is solved. They know how to deal with it. It's just they're tired of seeing it in every single aspect of space. And Marauders are kind of approaching that point now. And in the past, we had it with like Capitals, where Capitals were really high tracking. They were the best answer to everything. And Marauders are kind of in that same place now. So, yeah.
I understand the point that you're trying to make. And I agree that variety is the spice of life to a certain extent. At the same time, when I'm talking about balance, I do feel like most of the tools in the drawer should be able to do, the thing that they are intended to do well. And that way, when you bring two things together, they, what is the more important element about how those engagements end is who has the better ideas. Right? Like in my mind, any one engagement should not be, if you have two groups coming together and they're going to fight, the winner should not just be the one who has the better ship, because that feels bad. Especially in wormholes where it is much harder to put more numbers on grid in a timely manner. Having better support pilots, people who are, have better command destroyer pilots, making sure that you stock E-War. For example, yesterday I was in a fight. My group fought Little Red Riding Hole, which is a corporation in the Lupus Alliance, and J-Space. They are very, very talented pilots. We brought Lashaks. They brought Lashaks. We brought more Lashaks than they did, and we lost badly because they had a lot more competent support pilots that were, they had a great Widow pilot. They have great Logi pilots, and they were being able to control the grid in a way that we weren't, even though we had more of the DPS ship than they did. And we were able to, and in fact, I think we probably had better numbers, period. I think it was like 33 to 29 or something like that. And we outnumbered them slightly, but we were still driven off grid because they had better support pilots, or they had support pilots at all in this case. And in my mind, those fights are more compelling because that makes me think like, oh, we're actually playing a strategy game. And that's what this is. This is not just, my ship gets better numbers and has better tracking numbers and has better range than your ship, so my ship wins. In my mind, two ships, when they run into each other, should be, of some equivalence, in so much that they can, engage with each other, and then you need to find ways to break that engage. You need to find a way to break that stalemate, right? In my mind, that creates a kind of, I mean, when you're talking about balancing, I feel like you should be talking about trying to balance things so that when those groups engage each other, if the answer is to bring more numbers, well, they can bring more numbers. If the answer is to, find a competitive advantage, and this is one of the reasons why I like wormholes so much, is because the answer is not just to bring more numbers, because you can't. Very rarely are you able just to put more numbers into the equation. A lot of times you have to find other creative ways to break through. So, I agree in so much that I don't think that every ship should be the exact same, but I do feel like they should all be equally competitive. Just to say one more thing about this, because I know I'm kind of going on and on and on. The Proteus is a great example of this, and to a lesser extent, kind of the Tengu. They are, effectively similar ships to the Legion and the Loki, but are used much less often. In fact, the Tengu has only recently started to come back around, and the Proteus is still dog ass. And the reason for it, I mean, there are a lot of different reasons for why that is. But the fact of the matter is, you have four ships that should be, on paper, competitive with each other, and they currently are not. And the reason for that is just that when they were balanced, the Loki and the Legion benefited more from those balance changes than the Tengu, and certainly the Proteus, which has not been good in a long time. Even with the more recent changes, it's still not good. So that is, if I was going to talk to CCP about design philosophy, making sure that all the tools are at least workable, and then letting people find creative ways to use those tools is a better option than just saying, okay, well, it's current year, so we're going to make this ship good, and now you all have to fly it.
I think that the short way to put this is that perfect balance is impossible anyway, even though, like Stitch said, it would be boring. But what we need is rapid, endless tweaks to the balance of the game forever, indefinitely. Everything should be endlessly tweaked, and it should be done rapidly and on a small scale over and over and over and over and over again. That will put a lot of power into the hands of the people who are endlessly called upon, or not endlessly called upon at the moment, who are called upon to theory craft things.
I mean, and they
put
have
power into the hands of the innovative players, and rapid changes endlessly to the game is power in the hands of the innovative.
I mean, it doesn't even need to be anything crazy. I mean, you don't, and that's what I'm saying. I feel like CCP has been so desperate to make, a big change that's really going to pull this thing out of the nosedive, that you see these wide sweeping patch changes. You have something that a lot of other games do not have, which is a daily downtime. You could make minor incremental changes every day if you wanted to the game, and to find a way to bring it closer towards closer towards a state where more things are more competitive, right? Whereas where we are now, where you have a handful of things that are competitive and everything else is a losing effort, and it's just because this ship number bigger than this ship number. You know what I mean? So I agree. It doesn't even need to be every day, because that would be kind of nuts. But if every week they came out and say, listen, based on what we saw last week, we're making these minor incremental changes to the game this week, be aware, and then you go from there.
We got Ren Gaming 3 in chat says Brawl needs to be better than Kite. It's higher risk. I'm not sure that better is balance, but you're a guy after my heart. I am a close range proponent hugely. It is missing from the game in huge areas outside of a few 1v1 situations. Close range needs to return to the game. It is commitment to a fight, which is the opposite of what a lot of things in the game are. Everything is skewed towards keeping your options open to disengage where combat is concerned, and it's been going on for too long. I might even say it's been going on for 5 to 6 years. I will be back in 1 minute, guys.
Yeah, and so speaking of departures, so Phantomite's going to come back. Stitch has already dipped. He made it known to us.
Just have me. Yes.
Yeah, so he made
he
made it known to us. He didn't get a chance to say his final thoughts. He has family coming over, so that's one of those things you can't really stall, because some families just don't understand, or they're very demanding. And it's probably family's also probably more entertaining than a Twitch stream. So, but I do have his CSM forum thread, so if you guys want to check out more about Stitch, I know he's made his way around podcasts, not only like in this campaign period, but in the past. So if you want to hear him talk, you can check out, I would say, some of our older podcasts probably, but even like the less than 10.
Stitch is a really, really good candidate. I've worked with him a lot over the last couple of years because he hangs out in the same kind of spaces that I hang out, and he has good ideas. I legitimately think, and I don't want to sit here and, brown nose him too much, but Stitch is, if he was going to be on my ballot, he's going to be on the ballot that I publish to my people to kind of recommend, what some ideas about who they might vote for. I think he's a really, really good option. If you have spots in your ballot left open, and you care at all about game balance, you should have a spot open for Stitch. He's a really, really good guy, and he's got a good brain for this sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's why I wanted him on. So we worked around his schedule. I don't know if you guys have noticed. We might have some regulars in here. We're definitely earlier than normal. The reason for the scheduling change was because the Anger Games happens at 1700-ish, I believe.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And then I'm doing refereeing, so I have to go and actually help them there. So, and then Mark, you're not in the Anger Games at all, are you?
I am. Yes, we were swept yesterday. Hopefully we have better luck today. Yeah, I inted on it, or I inted as a kitsune, and kind of it did not get better after that. So, but no, my group, we started. We were in the AT last year, and we've been doing matches all year so far. Tournament games are fun. I mean, tournament games are really, really great. I recommend more people to do them if you can. Having more groups to scrim with and seeing more ideas out there. I mean, there were some crazy, crazy comps that we saw yesterday. I mean, there's some buck wild stuff. I'm pretty sure at one point we saw like polarized ham orthosis, which is buck wild.
Welcome back, Phantomite. I know we had been talking about balance, iteration. We could talk about tournaments if you wanted. I can talk about tournaments all day. That's kind of my thing.
I love tournaments, man. It's a lot of fun.
I think so. My other thing with tournaments, I always bring it up around CSM stuff too, is because I don't think people realize how, like, sometimes, I don't know if folks know this, for sometimes it's very difficult for CCP to see return on some of their investments. And I don't mean general investments of like, hey, we're building a new game. I mean investments like FanFest, right? Like everyone knows an in-person FanFest is amazing. Stream can't hear Nick. All right, Nick can't hear you. Nick, they can't hear you. So, and then I don't know if people also know, like at Vegas, like they spend like not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of dollars, tens of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
So like that big party on Saturday, like $50,000 easy. And it's like people are like, oh, but I spent $100 on my ticket. Like, sorry, dude. Like CCP is in no way making money from selling tickets. Like they're just kind of compensating. And tournaments are another one. So what you would have is, so Icelandic law, we'd have devs work on the weekend, and then CCP would compensate via, I think, like extra time off or something like that. So that's a expense to CCP. I don't know if people know how like financials work, but time off for employees is an expense. And so you have like, at least for a month out of the year, all these devs doing all this work, right? You have the devs doing the stuff on the cameras. You have the devs doing the cameras themselves. You have the referees in the background, like all the stuff, if something goes wrong. So you have all these devs putting in all this effort to run like a Alliance tournament. And then they would say, oh, we got 10,000 Twitch viewers. And it's like, okay, well, what do you see for subs? Like, did subs increase? Did you sell more skins? And sometimes CCP is like, yeah, it's really hard to measure that. We have no idea. And then the game goes away for a few years and everyone freaks out. People unsub. I know I unsubbed and I specifically stated, hey, you ruined the Alliance tournament. And so the reason I bring this up with you guys as CSM candidates is you guys have to kind of convey that value, something that is essentially unquantifiable. I think I said unquantifiable, but is huge quality of life to the game, to CCP, where you say, okay, yeah, you're losing money doing Vegas, but if you stop doing Vegas, people are going to be really upset. Same with FanFest or Alliance Tournament or any of these other little things.
So EVE fundamentally is a game about culture, right? Like we can sit here and talk about balance changes all day long, and those are important because they make the actual gameplay better. Changes to citadels make the gameplay better. Not being so wantonly destructive with patch changes makes the gameplay better. But in a lot of cases, the reason why groups have lasted as long as they have is because of the culture that those groups have created over time. And that's one of the reasons why big groups are so compelling to some people, because they have, a storied history. They have long-standing traditions. They have a compelling culture that makes people want to be there. Right. And we have, my group, as small as we are, we have worked very hard to, be a place where people want to come back to, and want to bring their friends to, just by virtue of, not necessarily because we win all the fights we take. We clearly do not. Any look at my guild board will see, we lose with some frequency. But the idea that, you take fights, you engage with your, you create a community, you create these bonds with the other people you play with. And that's I feel like at its core, EVE is all about those stories as much as it is about, the actual like white knuckle, like PvP situations, right? So that's why things like FanFest and things like, things like the AT are so important, is because these are fundamental pillars of the game's culture. I mean, people still talk about AT, matches they saw years ago. I mean, I remember watching Volta, back before, I've been playing for a long time, kind of off and on. And before I came back to the game a couple of years ago, there was an AT match that just happened. It happened to be on. I happened to get I saw it on Twitter or something, and I went out and watched. It was a Volta match. I can't remember who was playing. I know that they won, and I knew it was great. And I was like, man, I really need to get back into EVE. And that compelled me to come back in, join a Wormhole Corp, and now 3 years later, here we are. That is important for people. I mean, these things matter. They, and I agree with you. It is something that is hard to quantify because the numbers are not favorable. But at the same time, when you do things like this, and CCP knows this, otherwise they just straight up wouldn't do it. When you do things like that, what you're doing is you are introducing, or you are giving people more reason to enjoy the game. Right? The game doesn't need to be enjoyed just based on the gameplay, or just based on, the time commitment, or just based on how much money you've spent in it. Right? You find different reasons to make people, to give people a vested interest in the game, and you have a better chance of them sticking around longer. I mean, it's just like anything else. There are people who specifically come and show up and play the game year round because of the AT. We saw some of those players come back last year because the AT came back. And the more you do it, the more those players are going to stick around because they really, really enjoy the Alliance tournament. That's the same for any number of things. And that's why I've said consistently over the last couple of months, CCP just needs to focus on making the game better for more people, finding more reasons to get people invested in the game, and they'll make the money they desperately seem to want. They will make that money back because people will play the game, they'll sub to the game, they'll buy aesthetic implementation, they'll buy your skins, they'll buy merch. These are all things that they will spend money on. They have shown before they will spend a lot of money on these things. Just find reasons to make people want to play the game, and they'll play the game because the game is special and it's important and it matters to people. And so I agree with you. It is a hard thing to put numbers on, and so you almost entirely have to appeal to the emotions of it. But when you talk about the things that make Eve, I feel like this is one of those things.
Phantomite, do you have any thoughts? I know I kind of went on a tangent there, and then Mark responded. I don't know if you...
You don't have to be somebody who is actively flying in the AT to be somebody who greatly enjoys it. I enjoy watching it. I enjoy what it does to all of the players who are enjoying it as well. It creates a buzz throughout the game. It creates discussions for a couple of weeks, and it creates conversations before and after matches of anticipation and drama, and that's very Eve.
I mean, it's an event, right? It's like the Super Bowl. Not everybody who plays, or not everybody who enjoys the Super Bowl plays in the Super Bowl, right? There are, many more people who just watch it and enjoy it that way, or like the World Cup. There are only so many people playing in the World Cup, and those people are probably enjoy what they're doing because they for a multitude of reasons. But there are many, many more who get value out of that just by partaking in the spectacle of the whole thing. So I agree. I think that is something that makes sense. If you're going to put effort and time and money into something that can give back to the community like that is absolutely worth the investment.
I also like the Super Bowl comparison because I feel like the Alliance tournament, or tournaments in general, are the only ones where you can have player ads, and people get really mad if you don't have player ads.
Yes. I mean, that's another thing. You want to talk about spending money on stuff? Imagine if you had like each Alliance tournament team were able to have their own AT doctrines or their own skins for their ships during the AT. That is something that they could pay money to have, and that is, and then after let's say the top 4 or 5 teams, whatever, those skins then become available at a certain cost or whatever. Like you could have such and such as AT special edition skin, blah blah blah. People will spend money on those things because they are cool. Like, those are changes that are cool. It's like having a big sporting event memorabilia. It's like buying a baseball from the World Series, right? Like you go like, oh, this old Sammy Wilkins hit this ball back in 1966 straight out over the left field wall. My God almighty, it was pretty impressive. And I got it right here. I spent $7,000 for this baseball. That could be you, CCP. You could have that baseball money.
Is that similar to how they have kill mail NFTs from the Alliance tournament, or should we not go to
okay,
NFT
listen, let's
not go there.
What about player cards? Okay, NFTs, kind of like player cards, but just right-click save. Do you think CCP could sell player cards or something like that, like you have baseball cards?
What's the question here?
I would take
monetization merchandise.
I would take physical playing cards or physical cards. Like we've talked before within my own group about doing like playing cards of my own group, like people in my own group and like memes that are relevant to my own group. Those are things that I would buy. Now, if they did that same thing for the Alliance tournament, people would probably buy those, if for no other reason than just it's a way to remember something that was important to them. You know what I mean? NFTs, no.
To have CCP commemorating an in-game event would require CCP to pick a narrative and proclaim it as true.
Well, it didn't even need to be all they would need to do is be like, here are a set of cards. They have, the names of winners and team and people's faces, and That's it. And here you can buy this. It costs $20.
That's quite a small market, but with print on demand, that's irrelevant.
That's another thing. Oh my gosh, print on demand. That the fact that I could go on and I've talked at length. People
print on demand is incredible because there's no requirement to have stock. There's no requirement to have a central location and have exorbitant shipping rates. It allows you to create an unlimited number of designs that are up for sale because, again, there's no stock requirement. It's a fascinating prospect, and CCP has always repeatedly failed at putting pictures of spaceships on hoodies.
Yes, this shirt was print on demand. My alliance, it's a 250 man alliance or 250 tune alliance. This shirt did not exist 2 weeks ago, and I put it on our store so I could buy it because I thought it was kind of cool. And I bought it. This poster did not exist until I put it on our merch store. I only had to buy one, and they shipped it to me. It did not cost that much money. These are simple things. They could have done this or put a picture of a ship on a hoodie to make it kind of stylized. People will buy this stuff. That's how you can merchandise the game without, weird, meme.
Make things people want.
Yes.
Make sure it's available from the region that people are using services and lower the price, and they will sell 10 times as much of it.
They absolutely will. And you can make money off this stuff too, like without too much effort. Like, I use the money that gets generated from our merch store to pay for the merch store because, and our rates are pretty low. But we had one guy today buy 2 shirts. Okay. If I had set the default rate instead of the reduced rate that I have it at now, the default rate would have been $9 in profit on 2 shirts. That's, $10 for 2 shirts. You're telling me that with all these players in the game and all these people who have played the game in the past, you can't make, a merch store that will generate. I mean, it was effectively like 30% profit on a t-shirt that you didn't have to manufacture. You don't have to store. That's crazy. Anyway, it's a good idea. They should do that. I don't know why they're
on shirts, ships on shirts, ships on shirts. Get the ships, put them on a shirt, put it up for sale. It is over. Somebody unqualified could do this.
You own the image. All this stuff is, you don't even have to license it. You own the image. You just put it on something. So it doesn't even need to be shirts. You can put it on mugs. Yep. You can put it on posters. You can put it on those water bottles people carry around. You can do anything. I know people right now. I could call someone on the phone right now and say, hey, if they sold one of those like Yeti mugs, the silver stainless steel ones with the vacuum whatever on the inside that had the Minmatar logo on the outside, would you buy that? 100% chance they will do that. 100% chance they will do that. It would take no effort whatsoever. And they could do it right now if they wanted to.
Hey, give it a discount if you've got an Omega subscription.
I mean, seriously, it's this kind of thing that frustrates me so much. They are in such dire straits with money and the game not being, not generating the revenue they want it to generate. And we can sit here and talk all day long about ways to make the game better, and those are important, and it means something. Like, it means something to people that the game is worth playing, because people still want to play the game. As much as I talk about the culture and friendship is the best ship, and it really was the friends we made along the way. That's all great. People still want the game to be good. Okay, so it's important that we make the game good. But if you really want to make money, sell merch. It's not that hard. It's very simple. This is 2022. You can do it almost for free. Like it's crazy to me. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. It costs you nothing and generates free money from people who already want to buy your stuff, to the point where they will go out and have people print their own merch. They'll take your logos, stuff that they don't own, and they will put it on their shirts because they are so desperate to have shirts that have Eve stuff on it, so they can wear to FanFest, they can wear to Vegas, or they can wear to some meetup. Like, people want to buy this stuff. People want to invest in your game, and I'll tell you what made them more wanting to invest in your game is if you made the game more compelling. Find ways to bring more people in. More people will buy more merch, and you're just swimming in Iceland bucks at that point. This is crazy. Sorry.
No, you're good.
I feel very strongly about this issue specifically.
I think we can sum up the last hour in make the game good and more people will pay for it.
Yes.
And make merch people want
and they will
people
pay for
will
that
pay
too.
for it.
Yes.
Make cosmetics people want and they will pay for it.
I understand people are quick to judge CCP as, you know, in their business practices. One, because oftentimes they're very bad. And two, because like it is easy to characterize them as a greedy corporation owned by a larger greedy corporation. And the fact of the matter is, regardless of what you think about the state of capitalism in 2022, and I have strong opinions about the state of capitalism in 2022, that's irrelevant. Fact of the matter is that they're going to do the things that they want to, the things that they feel like they have to do in order to meet a certain number, right? And if they cannot do that, then the game's not going to, there just won't be a game, right? If they can't meet those numbers, there just won't be a game. If it's not financially lucrative for them to do so, Pearl Abyss is going to pull the plug at some point, and this whole thing's going to go belly up. The way you fix that is by giving more people more reasons to give you money. People in this game want to give you money so bad.
We're treading over ground repeatedly now.
We are.
Yes,
You're right.
so
You're right. I'm sorry.
I kind of want to shift that though, right? So people want to buy things, and it's really funny because I 100% agree. I actually sat 2018. I sat in a round table where people told CCP, "Hey, sell 3D model ships." CCP's like, "Well, we don't know how," and they're like, "Outsource it," and they're like, "Well." And then finally,
and we don't make as much money. Well, you're not making any money if you're not doing it.
We finally got 3D ships, and you know what? That dude's probably making bank. It's some third party. He's like, "Oh, I don't know. Here's an Oracle and a Rifter," and like people are just like racking it up. They love it. But
they were expensive, but they weren't wild like a lot of other models
they were
have
really
been in the past.
reasonable.
No,
yeah,
you're right.
But like my thought is, right, so CCP wants to make money. A lot of what, like, we as veterans and probably everyone in chat already wants, to pay CCP, but CCP has also focused on a lot of how do we get new players in, right? Because veterans can only spend so much. You can only have so many whales.
Sure.
So my question is, we know that CCP is revamping the new player experience, but how else can CCP try to get new players in? Like, what can they do from like marketing, advertising, promotion?
It's less about trying to make people aware of EVE Online, and it's more about making EVE Online advertise itself. Every single major event that has attracted people to the game has been a player-created event. It has not been a dungeon that CCP has created that has attracted players to this game. And what's more, of the extremely few people who will have been attracted to EVE Online because they were looking at the PvE as a form of entertainment, those people are not sticking around because that is not what makes EVE Online EVE. CCP needs to make sure that their biggest effort in changing the game is towards making opportunities for players to generate stories amongst themselves, because no story that even an expert writer could write is going to be as good as a natural player created story in the game. And that starts and is most important that is focused on combat in the game. EVE Online is a PvP game, which a few people disagree with quite violently, but if you don't think EVE Online is a PvP game, then your opinion as to the direction the game should take is going to lead it to further death.
I would argue that slightly and say that EVE Online is a political game where the politics are solved with violence.
There's not enough of that solution happening in the politics at the moment.
I mean, that is really what we should be aiming for, right? Like the best stories have been these dense political, back and forth between competing groups that culminate in some fight somewhere and culminate in or weeks of fights or an extended period of violence or a long-standing grudge that continues to exist over multiple years. Like those are the stories that people know about and people remember, and those are the stories that like people who I know who've never played EVE but have heard me talk about it or have heard about it through third parties or just whatever they picked up on Reddit or whatever. right? They know about, the fights that the big fights. They know about the things that were, such and such big, expensive thing, or this huge fight, the most expensive in history, right? Like but those things weren't the result of a developer coming in and being like, all right, so we're going to create this area, and people are going to go here and they're going to fight, and we're going to, introduce this new limited, instanced arena, and they're going to come in here and they're going to have their back and forth, and then they're going to be done, it's over, and we'll sell tickets to it. These kind of things pop off without warning because they are the result of actual organic interactions between real, and not the result of some meddling up top. And so I fully, and this is something I want to be pretty clear about this too. I mentioned this a couple days ago on another show, and I want to give Phantomite credit for it because I'm pretty sure he's been saying this about as long as anybody, if not maybe the first person to say that. Eve is a great sandbox as long as there's not somebody in there trying to muck the sand up too much. You give these people these tools, and then you step away and let them do the thing that they do, right? Like, we're all just out here finding reasons to, we're all looking for reasons to have meaning. Okay. We don't need CCP coming along and saying, this is what this means to you, because that's not organic, it's not interesting, and it's not compelling. Those last two things are the same. It's not a reason people want to stick around, I guess, is trying what I want to get at. Like, those aren't the reasons people care about Eve. The reason people care about Eve are because, they have been involved in things that have, developed over time. They have these disagreements with other groups that have led to fights and led to, exciting organic PvP. So you give people the tools to engage with other groups in this kind of way. You give people the tools to fight when those engagements eventually break down, and then you step back and let them do their work, because the players are going to make the game good for you. That's why Eve has the best player base in gaming, is because they are more than willing to take the wheel away and do their own thing with it, and do not need to have their hand held when it comes to creating content. Players are happy to do it by themselves. They just need good tools. They need, people who will listen and will iterate appropriately, and then they need people to step the fuck back. I don't know if I can swear on this show, but I'm going to say it anyway.
You're fine.
They just need to step away.
They also need a reason to go and attack somebody else, other than, because if the only reason in the game is go and attack for the sake of attacking, then, as we can see now, it does not create conflict on the level that Eve requires.
So we have a lot of these like player-driven stories, and I know, what is it? There's been a couple books, journals, articles, whatchamacallit.
Yeah.
So is there any way more CCP can capitalize that? Like, I think of like M2 attack, right? Like, that was the biggest battle in most recent time. They made a monument. There's some gaming article journals, but what else can CCP do? Do they just have to say, hey guys, we're adjusting the game, let's hope the players fight? Is that really all it comes down to for advertising?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, there has to be some form of resource for people to fight over that people need, and that resource has to be fewer than how many people want it. It's basically as simple as that. But on top of that, you also need to make it so that the defense is not as strong as it is now, and that needs to the defense capabilities in this game need to be constantly tweaked down until it reaches a level where it is both possible to be an attacker and a defender.
You mean, say that again? Defense needs to be nerfed so it's possible to be both attacker and a defender?
Needs to be taken down a little bit at a time until there's a useful balance where there are situations in Eve where it is feasible to attack and win, and situations where it's feasible to defend and win.
I gotcha. So we talk a lot about, so you mentioned like resourcing as being like a motive for people to fight over and go to war and create these stories.
Resourcing currently isn't something worth fighting over to the largest degree. There are a few small areas in the game where some resources will be fought over, but on a wider strategic level, you can just live in your space in nullsec as a block, and you've got everything that you need there without needing to go to the neighboring block and take what they've got.
Why would that not just result in what happened before, where everyone just has their own resources, they put them in Jita, and then you go to Jita and buy them and bring them out to your block space?
Well, because you could, as a large group, you can make so much more money by going and being the producer of that resource yourself rather than just trading it.
I think I agree with that to a certain extent. Like, just to put it into terms that I can speak more broadly about, in JSpace, there is a single resource that is gathered there more often than any other resource in that region, or any other region, or any other resource in wormhole space, and that's blue loot. When people talk about all the big money you can buy or you can get in JSpace, it's all blue loot. It's not gas, it's not moon rocks, it's not anything else that can be hauled out. It's just blue loot. And so, as a matter of fact, most engagements, and this is kind of crazy to say, most PvP that I would wager to guess that most PvP that most wormhole groups interact with on a day-to-day basis are looking for people who are crabbing, because that's where the resource is, and that's where people are going. They know people are going to be there trying to get it, so they know that they can have guaranteed content if they find people who are crabbing. If you introduce more resources or more varied resources that people will be interested in getting, you'll have other people undocking to go gather those resources because they want the money so they can fund their whatever other efforts. And then you will also have people who will try and kill them because it is worthwhile to kill them, either just because they want the content, they want the kill mails, they want to kill something, or because they want to deprive someone else of that resource. And right now, again, there's just the one resource. In nullsec it's different, and lowsec it's different. But being able to introduce more varied resources to the game that people can gather, and then making the generation of those resources riskier by making them less easy to stick underneath an umbrella. I feel like that is the way to go. If you have resources under an umbrella and those resources are worth less, but if you want resources that are more worth more money, and those resources should be more risky to gather, I think is the point I'm trying to make. Like, that is a content driver, because people will go after those people who are trying to gather those resources because they are in riskier situations, and because it is worth more to get that, right? And the other day, my group, in a handful of Kikimoras, jumped on a handful of paladins and wiped the field, right? But we were only doing that because we knew that okay, well, this is a C5. We were rolling for C5s. People are going to be in here crabbing because it's the only way they can make money now. Chances are pretty good. Like, we were ready to go for Marauders if we found Marauders, because that's the only way it's the only way you can get money right now in JSpace. The same thing applies. The same principle applies everywhere. If you give people a resource that is worthwhile to fight over, and has a level of risk involved where it's not overtly dangerous for the gatherer, and provides no challenge to the hunter, if you find that happy balance where it is, they can go gather it with an understanding of danger, that is something that people will fight over, and that is something that can create more compelling content.
We also have an example of what far more PvE in this game should be like. We have the example in Potchford where it's blended PvE and PvP.
Yeah.
It is a site that requires that you be in a PvP capable fit. It only pays out if you complete it, meaning that that if you don't fit for PvP, then somebody who is fit for PvP will take the rewards. It is a PvP as a profession site, and faction warfare is the golden opportunity to bring that type of content, albeit with ship limitations like a faction warfare style and lower rewards because you're in cheaper ships. Faction warfare is the ideal opportunity to bring this concept of blended PvE and PvP to far greater numbers of people at a far more accessible level. There are very, very few of the people doing PvE are playing the game for the PvE. And they are welcome to it, but if we can actually have some game with the PvE, then we have succeeded in making money-making actually fun and driving combat and stories in the game. And if this doesn't happen with faction warfare, and if it isn't tweaked immediately as people figure out ways to get rid of that intention from the content, then if this opportunity is not carried out properly, then, I mean, we might already be too late to save EVE Online. So this has to happen. It has to happen now. It has to be blended money-making and combat content, and it could save the game.
I agree with that.
And I'm kind of curious, your thoughts, Phantomite, because you mentioned fighting over resources too. Like give people like that PvE versus PvP kind of blend, and then give people a reason and an incentive to fight. What resource would you have? I know Mark mentioned Blue Loot and J Space, but what would you have in Nullsec that would be reasonable for a group to sell in one area to take all that resource without, inhibiting them in any way?
Well, there are several things it can be. There's obviously that resource could be money. Like a lot of PvE is just straight money right now. But why not put a focus on the PvE that makes straight money? Why not put a focus on that being some more PvP and blended PvE content? Why should everything be, oh yeah, here's an anomaly that you just sit in one ship doing this? Why aren't there some good rewards for 15-man fleet content in nullsec? This doesn't have to be limited to faction warfare. In faction warfare in lowsec, then the resource doesn't necessarily have to be straight up money or some form of material. It could be in fact it is LP, which translates to ships that people will want to purchase. I am looking for a rebalance of Empire Navy battleships to bring them to be desired, useful fleet ships, to bring a much bigger demand for them. Making a bigger demand for Navy battleships is a direct buff to the income of faction warfare, to the potential of it at least. And again, this is the golden opportunity for CCP to change this and make it work and make faction warfare be a primary supplier of something in demand.
Alrighty, that sounds good. I think chat's kind of arguing about it. Someone's talking about incursions. I know there are a lot of incursion in nullsec too. So TOs as well. Do you think that could be an option? I know. I think there's only
could what be an option?
TOs. So TOs, the NPCs with
right.
TOs. I think there's...
Yeah, they've basically not been touched at all. So this is a potential item in the game that has already been designed that could be iterated upon to open it up to more people, to not require such a dedicated focus of being solved content that you just run with a few alts, that kind of thing. There's, it's something that already exists and could just do with some tweaking. That's easy comparatively to making brand new content.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Alrighty. So that's kind of for nullsec. And actually faction warfare too. Highsec is a bit different because you can't really control highsec, at least not as much as you can nullsec and lowsec, and even wormhole space too.
Adrish says faction warfare missions and faction allegiance need to be revamped before that, Phantomite, otherwise we'll see bots in faction warfare space. Yeah, it's being revamped on a major level. It's not being rebalanced, it's being revamped. It is on the roadmap. It's the CCP's main feature for EVE coming up. So yes, you're right. And that's what is on the table at the moment. And that's what I want to be there for. That's what I want to be there to help guide. And that's what I want to be there to help make sure CCP is focusing it so that it rewards people who are willing to fight rather than rewarding people who are going to try and min-max it and then get chased out by PvP.
Yeah, we mentioned that at the beginning of the show too, knowing that faction warfare is on the roadmap. The other one's industry. I'm not sure if either of you had thoughts on industry. I know you said you're more of a PvP focused candidates, but I figured I'd open that up too because I'm always curious of your thoughts. If you're not an expert in an area or maybe you don't know as much, how would you approach meeting with CCP knowing they're still doing industry changes?
I'd like to see what their plans are and see what they think the effect is going to be, and then have a think about that.
I'm really interested in finding out where they're going to be sourcing things from. I mean, historically, one of the reasons why certain asset or certain resources have been so valuable is because they've gone into cat production or fleet production or being able to put shiny shit on grid. Like those are all valid reasons to have a resource. So being able to and so as a result, when the demand for those resources is high, there's going to be more content where those resources are harvested because there are going to be more people there trying to harvest that so they can get in on the money that is in the back and forth between the harvesters and the manufacturers. So knowing where that money would be coming from, or where those resources would be coming from, rather, just to see who is going to be the beneficiary of that content, I feel like would be interesting to find out. And knowing what their plans are for, they're saying that okay, well, we're going to be giving caps back to people. The cap prices are already starting to come down. Okay, well, so how are you going to manage cap proliferation? Like, how are you going to manage super proliferation? Like, what are your plans for, making sure that you don't, now oversaturate the market? Or is this just another ploy to, again, swing the pendulum back the other way, seeing how badly this has affected player numbers over the last year or two? Knowing that would be really interesting. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at about that one.
Alrighty. We have some interesting thoughts in chat. I know you mentioned Drees earlier. They say veterans are what kill EVE Online. CCP needs to ignore them and focus on new players. I'm curious as your thoughts, because I think both of you classify as veterans by most people's standards.
If you've listened to a word that has been said here, then you would understand that faction warfare is the golden opportunity to level the playing field for people who don't want to spend 2 billion ISK on a ship, who want to fly lower level ships, who want to earn money, who have possibilities to learn to fly with other players, who have the ability to start forming new groups, who have the ability to start not needing to join a super large group. I don't think that you're going to take this on, and I think that you're going to try and claim that all veterans are the problem again, because I think that you've already decided that you're bitter and hateful.
I just don't understand that mentality at all, honestly. Like, what you're saying is that the people who have been playing the game and investing in the game both financially and emotionally for the better part of a decade and a half, 2 decades now, are the same people who are making the game worse. Like, if anything, we should be finding ways that we can compel those people to come back to the game. I mean, the reason EVE is dying is because there are fewer people now playing than ever because the game's just not compelling to those people. Like, people will leave the game, and then the only people left are the people who have found other reasons to stick around. Either that reason is because they just want to crab all day, or the reason is just because they really like hanging out with their friends, and the game just they don't really care about whether or not the game is any good. Like, that is how the game gets to this kind of state. But saying that veterans are somehow the cause of that is wild. I'm not at all going to sit here and say that we should not be focusing on finding ways to make the game compelling to new players and bringing new players into the game. But I think doing that has to be balanced with finding ways to both retain current players and stem the bleeding, and also finding ways to bring people back. People who want to play the game and want the game to be good. People who will spend money and spend their time enjoying the game because they want it to be good. Those players are there. They have been there in the past. It was not that long ago where player counts were up, 30,000 and 40,000 a couple years ago. Well, more than a couple years ago now, I guess, but still, like, those players exist. They're out there somewhere. And if you can find a way to bring them back, that is, you will have a more rich game environment, more people doing more things. And yes, bring more players in, find new players, convince them that EVE is cool. You've got, a great art team. You've got a reworked new player experience. Those are all valid issues. But the idea that we should not be going after people who have invested so much in the game and want the game to be good is ludicrous. And I can't take that opinion seriously.
Yeah, I can't tell if Twitch chat's just like willfully ignorant or just like trying to meme. But it's getting kind of rowdy.
It's basically two people in Twitch chat. It's Dreege saying that the blanket that veterans hate new players, and it's Michael Otto, who has been going on and on and on and on, and who has just said perhaps one of the stupidest things I've ever read in chat. Here, Michael says, let me just scroll back up to it. Phantomite, new people will not play in groups, they play solo. Right, okay. Get out. This is a multiplayer game, you moron. Leave. You are the problem with the mentality of people who want to be left alone and given everything. Get out. I don't care, Michael. I don't care. If that is genuinely the mentality that you want to push as the solution to EVE Online, then go and play a single-player game. If the game is not going to survive if it changes to match the opinions of somebody who doesn't actually really want to play the true nature of this game.
He also later says that we are out of touch with new players. They don't stick around because they are getting ganked in high sec. Oh my God, how don't you guys know that?
That's interesting because CCP literally released a statistic saying players who get ganked stick around longer.
Yeah,
They also released a statistic saying if you join in on new player fleets, you also stick around longer. They credited Greygow with her Redemption Road stuff. Greygow, like her name implies, is very old in this game.
I mean, anybody who interacts with new players and new bros, I'm sure Jinx, who's also running for CSM, could probably speak more about this as well. Anybody who plays with new players will tell you that the quickest way to convince somebody that the game is bad is to put them into level 4 missions, let them run them every single day for years on end, and then never once introduce them to any kind of legitimate danger. I can tell you that because that was me when I first started playing this game. I got into a Raven early on, back when, and that was all I ever did for years, was run level 4 missions in high sec. I never once stepped outside the safety of Concord, and I thought the game was ass. And it wasn't until somebody convinced me to go out and get my ass blown up that I realized that, like, oh wait, there's something more to this than just dying, or just running the same missions over and over again. And the same can be said about high sec miners too. Like, there is a market for that. There are people who enjoy that kind of gameplay, but you shouldn't balance a game around them at the expense of, introducing players to more nuanced gameplay or gameplay or any gameplay at all. Honestly, like, mining rocks is not PvE really. It's not PvP. It's nothing. It's just, an activity. It's like a cookie clicker, right? Introducing new players who fall into those holes into, saying, well, here's a ship, here's a gun on the ship. Here are some other people who want to shoot you. You can also shoot them. In fact, you can join us and go shoot them if you want to. That is a way you hold on to players. That's why people stick around. I mean, I didn't play this game
for years at a time for the longest time, because every time I came back, all I ever did was run missions with my buddies or mine, and I thought was boring and I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't until I joined an actual PvP corp and a PvP alliance that I was like, oh, okay, and I haven't unsubbed since 2019. You know what I mean? Like, it seems obvious.
And I know, yeah, and I know a lot of people don't like. I think the majority of players actually do PVE, even though it is a PvP game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the key is that they do PVE with other people, right? So this is like the people who go in local and they're like, "Hey guys, I'm running level 4s. Does anyone want to join?" And then they like join up with random people, and then they start talking. Or like I did it as a new bro. I was trying to check out the NPE on an alt. So I was just running around and there was tons of people in local like, "Hey guys, join my corp. We're all out here hanging out. You can join our fleet and get like fleet boosts." And like they weren't trying to scam me or gank me. They were like genuinely wanting to play with people.
I mean, no discredit to Stitch. He has a good thing going at the time. I think Eve is just dreadful to play solo. I think it's just not fun to play by yourself. Now, that's not to say that there are not, people who go out and do solo PvP are somehow worse. And there's a lot to be gained from that as well. But I think at the end, you still have to come home to somebody. I don't, the idea that somebody would go out, do their solo PvP, and then when they're done, they go dock up somewhere they never talk to another person is wild. And I understand people play the game that way. I respect that they enjoy playing the game that way. I fully don't understand. And I think that we should be finding ways to get people into, if you want to create a compelling new player experience, make it worthwhile for small groups of new players to band together. Give them
faction warfare.
Like, I mean, this is kind of or I don't know. The faction warfare is the obvious, and so that's why it is so compelling that they are making this change now, because that is important for keeping new players active and present in the game. But to bring it back to what he was complaining about a second ago anyway, that I don't think should be the only priority. You have to retain players too. I mean, it's, once you get past the honeymoon period, the game still needs to be good. Otherwise, people are going to leave. So find a way to make the game compelling for more people, and more people will play the game. End of the story.
And kind of with that, like, because we're talking about a variety of different play styles. I know, Phantomite, a lot of your platform was about like play styles that have gone away and thus the players quit. Like, how would you approach CCP to bringing some of those back? Because those were, it feels like very, very niche. I think of like the mercenary groups, and there's maybe like one mercenary groups that exist in nullsec, and there used to be that used to be everyone's forte.
It's less about a high concept playstyle like that, and more about making the more basic concepts work so that those higher level ones can develop on top of them. And by that, I mean available combat content for solo, small, medium groups coming back to Eve. If those sizes of combat can come back to the extent that people can regularly go out and find that content, then those higher level concepts such as mercenaries can evolve on top of that themselves.
Okay. And then Mark, I'm not sure if you had any thoughts. I don't know if you are focused more on like the niche playstyles coming back, but I also want to give you a chance to address it.
There are several playstyles that have just fully evaporated in J space, and we have not seen those come back in any kind of appreciable way, even with more recent changes. The reason we complain so much out here about Surgical Strike is because Surgical Strike killed heavy armor brawling in high class wormholes. And I am criticized sometimes because it sounds like I'm just parroting complaints of high class groups. But were a lot of people who were playing wormholes in a lot of different high sec group or high class groups, not just one or two, but 12, 15, 20 different groups years and years ago that enjoyed that kind of content. And now there are maybe 5. People, you would sit on a wormhole, either a shared static or a direct connection with another group. You would each park a fax there, and then you would fight. And that content style disappeared when they killed our faxes and they killed our resistances and they, made each engagement a DPS race. That just doesn't happen now. And you had to bring, especially for the longest time, you had to bring near 1-to-1 logi if you wanted to be able to survive more than a couple minutes. And if you didn't, you were shit out of luck. So I think it's not just niche play styles that are affected whenever they do these changes. And that's why I feel like they need to have more varied CSM contributions. Because, in general, people who only play the game a certain kind of way and who get on are only really ever going to understand the game from a certain point of view. And very rarely are they going to, have insight and perspective outside of that bubble, right? And that's not to say that their criticisms or their comments or criticisms are valid. They're playing a part of the game. Like, they're playing the game in a way that a lot of people play the game, and those opinions mean something to them, and they are worthwhile. At the same time, there are still a lot of other people who aren't nearly as organized, who don't have that kind of contribution. And when when their play styles are affected, instead of going on Reddit in big blocks and complaining about the changes or petitioning CCP using their CSM, they just leave and they don't come back. And that's what's happened in a lot of regions of space. And that's why I think it's so important that we get people on the CSM who can explain in clear terms to CCP that if you keep doing the things that you're doing or things that you have traditionally done with regards to the way patch changes are made, with regards to the way play styles are being ignored, with regards to the way that, play styles like faction warfare have gone years without being addressed and have languished for such a long time, then you should not be surprised when people stop playing the game. And that's why your number count gets lower. And that's why people don't want to come back and play the game. And that's why you have to increase your subscription costs. And, it's a snake eating itself, right? So find a way that you can make the game more compelling to more people, to find a way to not immediately nuke every niche play style whenever you are addressing a concern. Find a way to carve your, make your patch changes with a scalpel instead of a buzzsaw. And you'll make the game that is more rich, has more content in it, and more people who want to play it. That's where I stand on that one. That feels like it should be obvious, but it is not a thing that is happening currently.
Alrighty. And so Engineer Nick has warned us that we're about 30 minutes left of the show. I know both of you enjoyed talking, so I want to make sure before I start pitching any ideas or questions that you guys have a chance to address some hot topics that you wanted to. I'm not sure if there is anything that comes to mind that you're like, oh, I was hoping we'd talk about this, but we haven't yet.
I'm down for whatever the next questions are.
Yeah, let's field questions from chat. See if they've got anything good. I don't care if they're meme questions. I'll answer anything.
Currently asking their own questions amongst themselves.
They are. It's like a second.
Otto.
I've been mostly watching it, and a lot of them are just like saying either like discussing, agreeing with you guys, but not a lot of questions actually directly to you.
It's like a secondary town hall happening. It's actually pretty compelling. I've been sitting here talking and wondering, just kind of keeping an eye on chat, wondering if anybody would like make comments, but it's all just like it's just like a secondary conversation. It's fascinating.
Yeah, usually I interact with the chat, but I've been focused on talking to you guys for most of this.
Opinions on, here we go. Teddy's got one. Opinions on Nighthawks on.
This is a question of needing constant small tweaking balance so that there is always a theory to work on to refresh the meta.
I love the Nighthawk. And
you won't love it if it lasts for 4 years, though.
Well, and that's the problem. I'm actually kind of mad. I'm mad that the Nighthawk is so good because I enjoyed the Nighthawk because it was a platform that was competitive with other command ships, not because it was the only competitive platform. And then everybody started flying Nighthawks, and now especially for groups and pulsars. Laserhawks will drop 30 Nighthawks, and they do that because the Nighthawk is really good, and they are really good when they fly them. And they're not just doing that. I mean, they have a great support structure. They have they run their fleets pretty tight. But it doesn't make any sense for them to fly anything other than the Nighthawk whenever they have the option to, because the Nighthawk is just really, really, really good. So would I rebalance the Nighthawk? I don't know if I would try and make the Nighthawk worse, because I don't like that as a way to balance. I don't think just like making things less fun is good design. Find other ways to make other doctrines more appealing, and then you will make those you will see people come away from one thing and towards another. You don't want to push people out, because that leaves them with a bad taste in their mouth. You want to give them something that is more compelling and bring them in. You know what I mean? So here's another one.
Suddenly a lot of these questions. Do we want to try and do a sort of quick fire on them?
Oh yeah, let's do that. That'd be
Rapid
cool.
answer.
Yeah.
What are your opinions on the live events like Doctor Who, Crimson Harvest, etc.?
You first, Phantomite.
You heard Doctor Who and you passed it over instantly.
You're goddamn right I did.
Oh my goodness. I enjoy the PvP, particularly in low sec, that the events that are not out of context of the lore of the game. I think that bringing something that is far too off the wrong end of the novelty scale just cheapens the universe.
Yeah, it's just silly. I thought it was, when I read it, I thought it was a joke.
You asshole, Mark.
I mean, I thought it was something from Eve Onion. I didn't real until I saw scarves in game. I thought there's no way this is a real thing. Events are great. I love events. The Christmas events are always really good, but oh my god, that was so stupid. I don't understand it all. All right, next one.
I kind of like this one. How do you, as a candidate, intend to communicate with CCP devs outside of your scheduled meetings?
By sending them direct messages and organizing meetings, like I already did during CSM 15, and as it turns out, the year I haven't been on the CSM, I've been able to keep up communication with a number of developers that have had useful effects on their thoughts to changes and to the game directly.
Yeah, I'm going to camp out outside their houses. I'm just going to bring a tent and a little cot, and I'll just sleep out in the front yard. When they leave to go to work in the morning, I'll be like, hey, remember those hack changes we talked about? Oh, you getting in your car? All right, goodbye. No,
I'm going to bring one of those guns where you fire it, and a little paper note comes out of the end of it that says, instead of saying bang, it says the game change you want.
It says, please rebalance citadels.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's just be upfront. I mean, with regards to, I mean, I'll approach CCP just like I approach. I mean, I meme about it a lot, but I work in a business. I have to deal with professionals every day. It's just part of the gig, right? Like you're interacting with somebody else at a professional level. You have to be professional with them. Come at them with a sense of genuine understanding, and accept that you're both sort of there for the same thing, and then find common ground and work through it. I mean, I understand it's sometimes hard to work with people who are working on a passion project, but that's just the name of the game, baby. That's why we're all here, right? So.
All right. I kind of like this one. We kind of touched on it a bit. It says, so from Symbiotes, how do you guys think about conflict drivers, and what would you want for attributes and potential new conflict drivers introduced to the game?
We used to have passive moons, which were a direct PvP, fleet PvP as a profession item of income for an alliance. We're far too deep into how moons work and what it provides to miners now to switch them back. But there's nothing to stop CCP from inventing something new that provides a resource that you simply go and collect that accumulates every hour, and for it to be a structure of limited capabilities that you fight over to control it, to take those resources. It's literally as simple as that. And that is a group income option for PvPers. It worked before, it will work again, it needs to come back.
Yeah, I mean, just to speak about wormholes for a second, we've been talking for months and months now about the fact that our moons are ass and there's not nearly enough gas in our sites. So I'll tell you right now, if you give wormholers more gas, you will have gas wars starting, because those little no boys do need all that gas for their capital ships. I mean, that give people more varied resources and they will fight over them. And that is a natural content driver that doesn't require you to change anything more than a number in a database.
Alrighty, I just had one. Now I lost it. Let me scroll. Oh, chat scrolls too fast. Can't find the question. All right, this one's actually from Michael Otto, who's probably the first intelligent thing they've said all day. They said, how are you as a CSM going to communicate with other players, so non-CSM, to hear how they feel about your suggested changes? And I'll say in general too, with just like their sentiment, like best way for people to reach you, and how do you want to communicate?
Well, I advertise my Discord name and I speak to everybody who speaks to me. I have a Discord with a couple of hundred people in it where people talk amongst themselves and talk to me. I'm available on streams where chat is happening here. I have a Twitter account, and I am available in game because I actually play EVE Online.
Yeah, I mean, I think Discord's a great tool for it. I hang out in a number of Discords. I hang out in Phantomite's Discord. It's a good Discord to hang out in. The Wormholer Discord, hang out there. My Alliance has a Discord that we, with a pretty aggressive public chat sometimes, and we interact with people there too. And even being part of talking in stations and just the idea of making yourself approachable, I think, is the big thing, more than even just making yourself available. Because it's one thing to say, like, here are all these different places that can be reached. That's all great. Being able to have people be comfortable enough to come talk to you is something completely different. And I think a lot of the candidates running right now are pretty good about this and have a long history of being open and willing to communicate with people who have concerns one way or the other. But I've been pretty clear with anybody. Like, if you have questions, you want to talk to me about something related to the game or related to the CSM campaign, or even just to talk about Dark Souls 2 PvP, I will spend an inordinate amount of time on that. A time I probably should be spent doing literally anything else. So I think it goes hand in hand with just having a lot of ways to contact you. Make sure that when they do contact you, you are cool.
Alrighty, and so this one's kind of very specific from Wotan Botan. What are your thoughts on oversized props, like prop modules, and should they be better fittable?
No, I think that they are in a good place now.
They're good.
Yeah, I think that there's a few ships where you can fit a 10MN onto destroyer-sized ships, and even on a couple of frigates where it works, but it has a very good penalty in that it uses up a huge amount of the ship's fitting resources. I think that it's in a good place for the 3 sub-capital sized ships. And I don't feel it needs changing in either way. It's very specific. It has notable drawbacks that means that it is a valid choice rather than one choice is simply better. I think it's great. It's fine.
Yeah, I fit an Eris with I overpropped an Eris a couple years ago, and the Eris would outrun the bubbles it would drop, which was pretty cool. So that's cool. I like that. That's fun. That's good for me.
All right, so this one's from Dr. Spot. I think this is a meme question,
Yeah.
but it says, why are most CCP devs jacked? I'm assuming he means physically fit.
Yeah, I think it's probably, as a guess, I don't have first-hand experience of this, but I would assume that he just randomly approaches and beats up the members of staff at CCP so that he trains them to be on the ball.
It's because they have to carry the weight of their heavy responsibilities. All of our expectations on their backs. It's enough to break a person. But the CCP devs are just too goddamn strong.
Alrighty. So this one's from Spinal Fluid. So it's around PvE/missions. It says, and it's a long question, so you guys can look at it in chat. But the summary is, what do you think of the idea of making piracy more accessible to new players? Piracy, as far as I'm aware, meaning You go into low sec. You don't join faction warfare, but you shoot players in low sec or you commit crimes in high sec.
Okay, well, I mean, here we go again. Increasing the amount of activity in faction warfare and low sec is more and more targets for non-faction warfare aligned people to go in there and commit evil, illegal acts. So the higher availability of that, the easier it is to get into.
I think part of it too would be making high sec bubbles less easy to stay in. I feel like finding ways to make it worthwhile to people who spend a lot of time in high sec to push them out, into near high sec regions of space, and give them compelling reasons to be there, so that when people who especially new players who are also going to be venturing into that same area decide to turn to evil, and commit to a life of villainy and piracy, they will have targets there to engage with who aren't just other elite PvPers. Yeah.
Alrighty, next question. What are your thoughts on anchorable bubbles, and do they lead to or prevent fights from occurring? That's from Garav. If you want to expand that too, so just anchorables in general, so like anchorable bubbles, cyno inhibs. There was another one, the anchorable beacons that decloak people. Any thoughts there?
Well, on bubbles providing and denying content, it's difficult to say one or the other. It's actually both. They start some content off by catching people, and they prevent some content by catching people. So it's I'm not going to be able to agree that there is a one or the other with that.
I don't think they're doing anything negatively one way or the other. They're just it's just like anything else. They are a way to change the landscape of the game in an area for a brief period of time. And if that gives you an advantage, then I'm sure you love them. If you are at a disadvantage as a result, then I bet you hate those and they suck. But I don't think they are inherently good or evil. They are just an item that they're just something that you can use.
All right, there are a couple questions from Mark. It says, I want to hear more about gas wars. Do you think it can be a legit conflict driver or not really?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think it's a legit conflict driver. We were talking last year about introducing gas war simply because there is an abundant need for gas now. Nullsec blocks. My group has been contacted by at least two nullsec blocks about potentially delivering gas to them, just because they need so much of it right now for capital manufacture. I mean, that is going to be a thing in the future. People need gas, and wormhole spaces where you have the gas. And so if you aren't going to give back the moons, if all of our moons are going to be bad forever, then fine. Give us better gas, make it a compelling resource to fight over, and then people will fight over gas the same way they fight over blue loot now. I mean, that is just even if it, and there will be all kinds of people who come in to do that. It won't just be wormholers. You'll have fleets of nullsec, gas huffers coming into J space, and to try and suck that good gas, for themselves or for their blocks or whoever. That provides targets for other groups to then themselves, interact with those people and try and kill them. It's the same thing we've been saying all day, right? Like, you're giving people like a resource to fight over that will inherently cause friction and create. I think it's at least I think it should be worthwhile, because if you're talking about, each region has a specific thing that comes out of their region for the manufacture of things elsewhere in space. Wormhole space is where gas is. So it makes sense that you make the gas better in wormholes to create that content, both for the people who are using that gas to manufacture ships and for the people who are trying to kill the people who are trying to gather the gas for that manufacture. I think it's obvious. I mean, that sounds, and plus gas wars sound cool. Like, that sounds like a cool thing to do. Like, for the longest time in wormholes, either you have eviction content where you were hunting crabs. Or, if you had a nullsec static, you could go blopsing, I guess. But being able to introduce gas wars to that environment, hot stuff. I'm all about it.
Alrighty, and then the second one, this is very wormhole-esque. So it says, is there much difference between low-class playstyle, so I'm guessing low-class wormhole playstyle, and high-class wormholes?
Yeah, I mean, there is. That's not a secret. High-class wormholers always have there's always the option of capital escalation, right? In any engagement, somebody can undock, 8 dreads and come sit them on your fleet. And that is just something you have to kind of prepare for. In low class, you don't have that. And in fact, in low class, you also are more likely to find holes that are more connected to each other. C4s and C2s both have multiple statics. And in general, people don't roll holes off in low class nearly as frequently as they do in high class. So in high class, you have longer, straighter pathways of connections between different groups that, occasionally interact with each other in big fights. And in low class, it is much more of a labyrinth of connections that, you can kind of end up anywhere. There are different perks to living in high class compared to low class. Low class groups are, they don't have access, locally to the same kind of resource generation that high class groups do. By the same margin, you can't fit 90, you can't fit rather 9 dread or 9 phoenixes inside of a low class hold, to log off on their fleets or something. So those are, there are benefits to both. There are detriments to both. Have been affected differently, but at the same time, they are both bound by the same general rules. So I think, and again, this is another area where if you were going to balance something for wormholes, I would probably argue that you need to be careful about balancing it, not just for wormhole space as a whole, but for high class space and low class space. And not just that they need to be fully different, but those two need to be taken into consideration when you're making those changes, because they're both affected differently. I mean, it is no secret that, you get a lot more kitey gameplay in low class holes. You have a lot more just cloaky camping in low class wormholes, especially low class wormholes that are connected to have case space connects to try and catch people coming in and out. And in a lot of ways, high class wormhole space acts more like low. So I think that, and it goes without saying that both are equally important to me. I lived in low class for the better part of the last 2 years and only recently moved to high class, but I have enjoyed the content we've gotten in both regions of space. I think both have suffered from changes over the last couple of years and both need to be addressed. But when you're addressing them, you have to also, recognize that they are not the same. Phantomite, are you an artist?
My wife makes a lot of use of a lot of crafting supplies.
Nice.
Being an elite computer video gamer requires only one desk with a computer on it, whereas being into a lot of different types of crafts requires the other 75% of the room.
That was a Twitch chat question too, so
Yeah.
Nailed it. Got it.
So I feel like there's a couple of questions around like skill points and skill training.
Yes,
So
I'd like to go for that one.
Yeah, so one person asked, do you think increasing the skill training speed would be good, right, to allow that catch up? But I also want to kind of pair that with, how do you feel about the new way CCP is going about skill training, where no matter if you have a skill training or not, you're still collecting SP, and your thoughts around there?
Both of those things are, in a way, the same thing. For instance, should skill training be faster so that people can do the fun part of skill training, which is waiting and then unlocking something new to play with? One important thing there is something they're already doing, which is the eventual removal of attributes. That's just an unnecessary complication that gets in the way of the fun part of skill training. Now, the fun part of skill training, which is unlocking something new and being able to have some novelty, yeah, that's quite slow. But there is one thing very importantly that would be a virtual speed up of skill training, and that would be CCP cracking down on the boring skills that you need to train, but that don't give you that moment of novelty. And that is, of course, the magic 14 skills. I think the best solution to that I've seen is that those skills get given to you in their entirety by completing parts of the tutorial and trying out at a low level other parts of the game. Just removing them removes a lot of flavor and would be disincentivizing training a lot of things at all. But giving them away reasonably rapidly, I think, is the key to that. So skill training can be sped up without speeding up skill training by getting rid of the grind of the boring skill.
Or find a way that you can balance that with fitting limitations, right? Where like having the skills trained doesn't necessarily lock you out of fitting modules, but having them trained at higher levels makes you able to fit things more easily. So you don't have to rely on meta modules with fitting, they don't have the same kind of fitting restrictions as Tech 2 or Faction. So you can use better modules and have better ships if you're training those skills, but just having the skills inherently does not lock you out of being able to fly those ships in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I feel like that's kind of almost like what happens when you go from Omega to Alpha. Like your ship sells a fit, or you're still sitting in it, but you may not be able to use it.
Right.
A little different.
Yeah. I mean, you're taking something that is currently a requirement to do a thing basically and saying, okay, well, you can still fly the ships, but if you want it to be easier for you to fit those ships and make them better, you have to train these skills to a certain level, right?
Yeah.
So
all right. So this question is from Pirate Pete, but not spelled like the normal name Pete.
that guy has had some really good questions so far.
Yeah, and so this one I think is interesting, and I'm really curious as to how you guys will answer. So this makes mention of Phantomite's earlier comments around big player empires not wanting to risk what they've built, which he agrees with. But that mindset seems to be a tough one to break. Do you think that there will be a CCP thing to fix, or a player do you think that's a CCP fix or a player leadership fix, like a culture change, like something to break the Cold Wars, and what would that look like?
The culture around risk aversion and holing up in your own metropolis and staying there and not going outside and demanding that you are PvPers, but everybody should come to you so you can prove it. Let's get this clear. People are playing the game that CCP has built for them. If the game was changed so that the game to play was not hole up here with 40,000 people and not do anything, then people wouldn't do that. As it stands, people are not fighting because the game isn't designed to encourage it. I don't blame people for playing the game in the optimal way that it has been designed. That's not the player's fault. That's in CCP's hands, and it's only gotten to this stage because CCP has left it for 6 years in that state. And they're the only people who can change it, and they can change it.
I also agree with that.
Alrighty. I was going to say, I don't see any more recent questions, unless you guys had one that I may have missed. I know there were a lot. Anything you want to answer in particular? There were a lot of like person-specific ones that I kind of skipped over because I wanted to adjust them to you both.
Well, if I'm guessing that we've probably only got 7 minutes left. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Should we do like back and forth quick fire on the player-specific ones to us?
Sure.
Oh, I'd have to scroll through them.
Oh no, you have to scroll.
I know. I have Twitch chat in a tiny little window, so I can read it easier.
Okay, fair enough.
Let me go back. Everyone started arguing with each other too. It's actually kind of funny.
Let's see.
I know I asked some to Mark.
Well, we got one here. Guarev says people will negotiate to avoid conflicts, even in a PvP game. That's how risk-averse people are. Quite frankly, that's not a question, and he's absolutely right. The way that this is solved is by not designing the game to give the same level of progress, income, and content to people who are simply opting out of the content.
Hey, I also found one here for you, Phantomite. This is from McBeggar1, a little ways up. It says, question to Phantomite. What do you think about tethers using fuel based on mass? I think they are currently overpowered.
I think that tether, this is something that I think you spoke about earlier as well, Mark, which is it was Stitch as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Saying that putting the purposes of both a pos and an outpost together into the same structure means that they are massively overtuned. Personally, what I'm going to be working on and what I have been working on is ways for people to still be able to function in this game, but ultimately without tether.
Here's another one. Spod wants to know, what do you think of Eve Anywhere?
Yeah, if they want. I don't really care. We all use a computer at home to play it. I think that if they can, for instance, make it remember your client settings and overview settings and things like that,
wouldn't it?
yeah, that would be a good start. It's not a particularly cost-effective thing for CCP to be doing because it's not free for them to be running remote graphics cards and streaming the extra bandwidth on that kind of thing there. So that is costing them more to have players playing like that. The per day cost of 30 plex for alphas to play on it is extremely expensive, but they've got to cover the costs somehow. Yeah. I view Eve Everywhere as something that is interesting, but it's not anywhere near at the front of my mind when it comes to the future of EVE Online.
I agree with that as well. I don't think it's necessarily the most important thing running right now, or I definitely think it's not the most important thing running right now. I will say it has been super useful over the last week. I have two computers at work. I have my work laptop and I have, my personal laptop. And while I was at lunch the other day, I needed to do something, with our corp structures. I need to adjust an ACL. And usually I would just have to wait till I got home from work. But I was able to use my personal laptop while I was at lunch to make that change without having to take all the time to download and install the game. And that was extremely useful. That was very cool. So I like the idea that it exists. I don't know if it was the most important thing to be working on right now, but it is kind of cool. I do think it is a little bit too expensive for alphas. But
basically it's like, oh yeah, neat, next.
Yeah, it is. Cool. Very nice. Thank you. Going on.
Yeah, so I was going to say, we still have a lot of questions left, but we're at the end of our time. So I want to do final thoughts from you guys. Give a quick little blurb about yourself again. I believe you can post links in chat. I don't think they get auto-deleted. So you can post all your socials or your forum threads, or websites, whatever you may have. We'll start from the top and go down. So I'll start with you, Mark.
Sure. I think it's important, to have people with varied ideas on the CSM. I think it is important that we continue to use this process, even if it's not necessarily there has been a lot of back and forth about whether or not the CSM matters anymore, or whether or not the CSM does the thing that we want the CSM to do. I think at the end of the day, especially for wormholers, what is most important is the knowledge that we have somebody at the table, even if the outcome is not what we desire it to be, who can at least sit there and say, listen, and explain to CCP in detail with some kind of passion that the changes that they've made have stifled us and suffocated us and are killing JSpace. Wormhole space is there's a proud tradition out there. It is a place for both communities and individualists. It is a place where, it is truly lawless. There is very little safety that you do not implement yourself. There are no guarantees in J space, and there is a whole community that has flourished inside that region that is now, on the operating table, heaving its dying breaths. And it kills me whenever I think about it, because I only started really getting into J space in 2019, so I've been out here for 3 years, and it kills me to think that I could have been out here for so much longer and really enjoyed some of that, especially the heyday of wormholes. And it bothers me that if things continue on the way they are now, I won't ever get to see that. I still think we can pull this thing out of the nosedive. I really hope people will give wormholes a chance this year. We were very close last year. I was 200 votes away. And, we've worked hard this year to try and communicate with more people, coordinate with more people to make our feelings heard about this. I would like to be number one on your ballot. If you don't have room at the very top of your ballot, somewhere in your ballot would be great. I think what we're doing here is important. I think the ideas we have are common sense. They are easy to implement. As long as we have people who can sit there and communicate clearly with the developers about these very basic issues, I think we can see reasonable change in the future. And if not, at least there will be somebody there at the table absolutely shrieking about how unfair it is every step of the way. I'll link my stuff in chat, but I want to give it to Phantomite because I've talked way too much today.
Go for it, Phantomite.
I stand for PvP, and I stand for content being increased multiple times throughout all areas of the game. The most important thing that EVE needs right now is opportunities for income and for content outside of being part of a large group. Faction warfare is the right place and time for this. I'm the right person to help guide CCP through faction warfare. And Michael, you need to go and unretain yourself from the game, and all of us can be a lot happier.
Call out, dude. All right, and then Phantomite, make sure you link your stuff in chat. So for those who aren't aware, DJ Cactus, spelled incorrectly, is Mark Resurrectus, and then Wispius is, I think that said that right, is Phantomite. So you guys don't have the very easy names to follow. But yep, those are the links if you wanna check them out. And then I'm gonna do a little blurb, little shout out. So we have the Wormholer Town Hall that's coming up. I believe Foxholers are hosting that. I literally just linked it for myself, and now I lost the link.
Yeah, it's going to be on the Foxholers Discord this upcoming Saturday.
Yes, so that is this Saturday. I believe it's at 2000. Yeah, 2000 UTC. I know I have humbly requested somebody at TAS stream it. I am actually out that day. So hopefully we have somebody there streaming it. But if not, you can participate either way by just simply joining. I think you react and you get what is it? You get like a little role that just says like town hall or something along those lines, so you can join in and not have to, participate in any other way in the Discord. You don't have to use your character name or some single sign-on login. You just simply click the link and click the react to the role. And then there was also some more somber news today. So UAX Death actually passed away. I believe it was within the past 3 days. There's a Reddit thread about it. So I'm going to link that. They are right now currently doing a Sino Vigil. I say currently because they said at 1700 and it is before 1700. So I've actually started that. I have my OBS set up super neat where I can just do this and I can show you guys on the stream. So that way Nick can stream it. So this is out at JTAGZY. There's a giant keep star. I have tether rights because I'm within Pandemic Legion and we're actually blue. But if you look, there's actually neutrals here. I saw some snuffed out folks actually talking earlier about coming and participating. So if you would like to participate in the Sino Vigil, I believe it's open to everyone. Just burn down to JTAGZ and find the Keep Star. Or I will say warp to one of the 20 or so Sinos. I think they're going to be more over time. Lots of fireworks. For those who don't know, I never personally knew UAX Death. But as far as I'm aware, he is one of the founding, I don't know if founding father is the right word, but he's one of the essential people in a lot of the history of nullsec. So if you talk to anyone within the Empires of Eve, he's mentioned there. Any of the old blood within the game, They were at probably some point either allied with him or fighting against him. So really, really somber news. You can check out that link for more of the stories from people who actually knew him, because a lot of the people who did know him and were good friends with him still play this game, which is how we all found out. So really somber news. I want to give a shout out to both Phantomite and Mark for participating with us, as well as Stitch. We plan to do another show next week, probably more industrial focused depending how it goes. But again, Anger Games 5 coming up within 45, 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go participate there, go watch the Anger Games. I'm going to try and convince Nick to do the raid. It might be a little longer for the raid, but that's over at the CCP channel. So watch that. Lots of good fights. Anger Games is a player-run tournament. We were talking about tournaments earlier. Tournaments that probably only really came back because of some specific CCP devs, such as CCP Aurora, as well as players pushing for CCP to do them. So that's some of the work of the CSM and some of the work of the players. But thank you all for watching out. Thank you for participating in chat, even you trolls. But thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good Sunday, and for those in America, a good Memorial Day weekend. Have a happy Sunday.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.